The season of Lent is a time to pay attention to the ways that God moves in our lives. As we grow aware of these ways, our terrains change, just as Jesus inspires our lives to change. Let us follow in his path to the cross and beyond as we witness God on the move.
Our gospel passage today comes from the Gospel of Luke. It's chapter 13, verses 31 through 35. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." Jesus said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day, I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. I rarely remember my dreams, so when I do, I know that they're important. I know there's a message in the dream for me. And during a time in my life when I was having what I would consider a spiritual growth spurt, I had a bunch of these kind of dreams, and in so many of them, I sensed a message from God. And in one of those dreams, one that was so vivid and so clear that I still remember it to this day, I had a message that really goes with today's sermon topic in our Lenten series, God on the Move. Because today we're talking about how God moves past all obstacles. So in my dream, I was driving a car down the road, and there was somebody in the passenger seat next to me, but I couldn't see who it was. All I knew was there was this sense that it was a fatherly figure. And as I was driving, obstacles began to appear in the road. Now, at first, they were just like little obstacles, and it was easy enough for me to drive around them and to miss them. But as I kept going, the obstacles became bigger and more frequent, until eventually I reached a point where I could not get around them. I was stumped. I just had to sit there in the car, unable to go anywhere. And it was at that point that the figure next to me simply said, "Why don't you let me drive?" Well, I can tell you, I woke up from that dream with a very clear message of what God was trying to tell me. God was showing me that even though I had felt like I had given my life over to God, that there was still a lot of things I was holding on to and trying to control. You see, over the years, I had learned to be independent, to be strong, no matter what was going on in my life. And at this particular time, there was a whole lot going on. Things that I really needed help with and guidance with, even though I didn't want to admit that. But in the dream, God was offering to take control and to help me to get beyond those obstacles. All I needed to do was to let go and to trust God. Well, in our passage today, Jesus was at a crucial point in his life. He was headed toward Jerusalem, where he knew he would experience torture and crucifixion. Now, it would have been so easy for him to allow that knowledge to turn him aside, to let it become an obstacle to his mission of redemption and salvation. Had he decided to take control of his destiny at that moment, I have a feeling he would have turned around and run the other direction. Well, unlike me, however, Jesus had early on given himself fully to his Father's guidance. He knew that it would only be with his Father's help that he would be able to accomplish the cosmic changing mission that God had given him, no matter what the cost. Now, this didn't mean that it was easy for him. It didn't mean that he wasn't afraid or grief-stricken or distressed. He was all of these things and more. The story we heard today shows some of those powerful emotions that Jesus was experiencing at this point. Other stories show other emotions, especially as he gets closer and closer to his death on the cross. In this passage, we see two emotions merging in Jesus: courage and sorrow. First, we see his courage in the face of Herod, a powerful man bent on doing evil. The Pharisees showed up with an obstacle to throw in Jesus' path. They warned him that Herod was out to kill him. Now, that trick would probably have worked with most people. You tell me somebody's out to kill me, and I can guarantee you I am going to pack my bags and head out of town. Why risk such a real and present danger? But Jesus doesn't do that. Instead, he faced down the Pharisees and he said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, "Go and tell that fox that I'm not going to let him get in the way of accomplishing the work my Father has given me to do." Imagine standing before a group of mafia henchmen and calling out their boss in such a manner. Well, that's just what Jesus was doing here. These guys may have been Pharisees, but their loyalty was to Herod, not to God. They've come to tell Jesus to get out of Dodge before sunset, or else face the consequences. You know, it's interesting that Jesus chose the term fox to describe Herod. Foxes are tricky little creatures. They're sneaky and deceptive. They act like they're mighty and strong, but in truth, they only seem so because they chase after much weaker prey. Many of us remember the childhood stories of the fox in the henhouse, threatening to steal away the baby chicks. Well, that kind of act is a sign of cowardice, not strength. So if Jesus was trying to rile up Herod, calling him a fox, well, I think that would have done the trick. Herod was a lot like a fox. He preyed on the people of Israel, people who had little power in a world ruled by the Roman emperor, in a world where peace was enforced by Roman soldiers. Jesus saw right through Herod and called out his despicable ways in spite of the danger to his own life. But then we see Jesus move into another emotion. His anger toward Herod and the oppressive powers of Rome that were abusing the people of Israel turned to deep sorrow. He addresses the city of Jerusalem in a lament. But I think we can understand Jerusalem here to be symbolic for all the people of Israel. After all, Jerusalem was the center of Israelite religion and culture. It was the city where the people came to worship God, to offer their sacrifices, to celebrate the religious feasts, and to remember the stories of their ancestors. Jesus' lament, his cry of distress, is heartbreaking. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. While Herod is the fox in the hen house, Jesus is the mother hen who is trying desperately to protect her children. Now, this isn't just Jesus crying out either. This is God incarnate through Jesus, crying out to God's people. In Luke's gospel, Jesus only visits Jerusalem once. But God has been laboring over the people of Israel for centuries. For hundreds of years, God had sought to draw the people into covenantal relationship with God. And while there were periods of time when things went really well between God and the people, far too often the people turned away from God. They worshiped other gods. They disobeyed the law of the covenant. They refused to love their neighbors. They followed the way of death and destruction. And now, even as Jesus is facing his terrible death on the cross, he cries out in sorrow over the very people who have rejected him. Not only in his time, but through all time, including our own. For we too have a habit of turning away from God. We pursue other idols, give away our time and resources to things that are not of God. We disobey God's law of love, refusing to love our neighbor. We, like so many before us, continue to pursue the path of death and destruction. Now, this is no surprise to God. I believe that even as Jesus wept over the people of first century Jerusalem, he wept also for those who had lived throughout the centuries before him, and for all of those who would live throughout the centuries after his death and resurrection, including us. Even as he went forward toward his own agonizing death, he knew that the world would continue on its destructive path. He knew that there would always be those who, despite their claims to be his followers, in actuality would choose to follow the way of violence, war, and oppression. He knew that we would all struggle to accept his way of peace and love, yet he went anyway. Jesus even overcame the obstacle of knowing that his death would not change how this world works. How? How did he possibly manage that? Could any of us have made such a sacrifice, knowing that the world would go on just the way it always has. But you see, Jesus didn't put his trust in the world. He didn't do what he did hoping that it would make all of us little chicks decide to gather for safety and security under his wings. Rather, Jesus put his trust in God, trusting that God's love is bigger than all of the evil that has ever been and that ever will be. Bigger than all the foolish choices we human beings would ever make, and we have made a lot. God's love is bigger than all of the hateful things we could ever do. And that's what Jesus put his trust in. Jesus put his trust in God and moved beyond every single obstacle Satan and the world tried to put in his way. And now he promises to help us do the same. We will face many obstacles in our journey of faith. We'll be tempted to turn away from God and from God's way of love. We will seek security and safety in the way of violence, war, and oppression. But these things are not of God. My dream reminded me that God wanted to guide my choices and my decisions so that I could avoid stumbling over these kinds of obstacles. First, though, I had to trust God, just as Jesus did. And I could trust God because I knew that God has promised to never forsake me, and that God's love is indeed bigger than any obstacle that might come my way. That's a powerful truth, and it's one upon which all of us can depend. That's the good news, and it is very good news. The other good news is that when we fail to turn to God, and we will from time to time, God will still love us. That's the truth that enabled Jesus to bear the weight of the cross and the agony of death. It is the truth that will enable us to keep going even when it feels like we no longer can. It is the truth upon which the whole season of Lent turns. So I ask you, what obstacles are you facing today? What's getting in the way of you following the way of God? Whatever it is, God can move you beyond it. That's a promise. It's a promise for all of us. Thanks be to God. Amen.